Yo, what is good, my DIY home buying friends? I wanted to make a video running through a purchase and sale agreement for a residential home. I think this will be helpful. Now, a couple of caveats up front. This contract that we're going to run through is specific to Washington State. Pretty much every MLS or every state is going to have its own standardized forms that realtors have access to through their affiliation or real estate association that they pay dues for. And so one of the first things you'll notice on this form here is that it's copyright to the Northwest Multiple Listing Service. And this is why agents say, hey, these are copyrighted forms. I pay for these forms out of my dues. I can't just hand them over to you. And I know that as a home buyer, especially one self-representing, that can be like endlessly frustrating. It also means that I don't even have access to all of the purchase and sale agreements across the United States. However, all that being said, there is a lot of similarity between these forms and the things that make a bona fide purchase and sale agreement truly bona fide, is consistent no matter where you're at or what state you're in. So I will highlight a couple of those. Like, you could write your own purchase and sale agreement on the back of a napkin, and as long as it is signed by both you and the buyer and has purchase price and consideration and close date and all of those things, identifying the legal property like tax ID, you have a legitimate agreement. But I still think that it's helpful to go through a standardized form here. I think that it'll help you as you just wrap your mind around, okay, what does it look like to put together a purchase and sale agreement? And then when it comes time to actually draw one of these up, I always recommend that you ask the listing agent to either provide you with the forms or to just go through it with you to treat you like a customer, right? Like, this is the same thing that you would do in a car dealership when you're signing all the forms to drive away in your car. Like, the car salesperson, they work for the dealership, not for you, but they can still walk you through what goes into the agreement. Well, the same is true in real estate, and a listing agent in service to their client can treat you as a valued customer, and they can help you fill out this form. They can provide you, or at least the local form for your area. And so by going through this one in Washington State, I still think it's going to give some great categories for you to hang your hat on. So with no further ado, let me make myself smaller and let's talk through it. All right. A lot of this is pretty straightforward. We've got the date. This is the date that you are actually filling out the purchase and sale agreement. MLS number is the way of identifying the number assigned to the property through the MLS that it is listed in. And then offer expiration date. This is one of the first areas where you can get a bit strategic with your offer. The sooner you make your offer expiration date to when you're actually filling this out, more pressure it puts upon the seller to reply to you quickly. I generally recommend somewhere between 24 and 48 hours for an offer expiration. Wouldn't do it any longer than that, because as a listing agent, as soon as I receive an offer, what I'm going to be doing is calling every other party that was interested in the house and try and leverage the fact that I just received an offer to get them, the other buyers, to potentially submit their offers. So the shorter that you give as an expiration date on your offer, the less time there is for other potential buyers to submit offers, less likelihood there is of multiple offer situation. By default, at least in Washington, the offer expires at 9 p.m. on the expiration date, but you can specify anytime you want. So you could say that it expires Friday the 28th at 5 p.m. Buyer, this is where you put your name as well as the name of anybody that you're purchasing the home with, and then your status, married couple, or if it's an LLC that you're buying it as, or whatever, status goes there. And then you do need the legal name of the seller, and that's something that the listing agent can provide you with. So you'll get the seller's name in there. Now, the address for a property is not its legal description, and to have a bona fide purchase and sale agreement, you must have the legal description, which is also known as an Exhibit A. So this is where you would put the tax ID number, tax parcel number for the property. That's part of the legal description. And then you're also going to need to get from the listing agent or the title company the actual Exhibit A to include with this purchase and sale agreement in order for it to be bona fide. And then the legal address, sorry, this is not a legal address, this is the mailing address, and that's something that you'll also put on here. But it's funny, you can have a bona fide contract without the mailing address as long as you have the legal description, but that does not work the other way. Just having the mailing address is not good enough. Then in Washington, there's this section for included items. These are things that are often found in a home that are a little bit unclear as to whether or not they're going to get left behind or whether they're personal property. So check off whatever it is that you're wanting the seller to leave: the stove, range, refrigerator, washer, dryer. I won't insult you by reading all of them, but the big questions here are often things like attached cameras, attached TVs. Technically, anything that gets bolted onto the property is now a part of the property. That also includes things like window coverings and curtains. If they are attached to the home, they're part of the home. But many times sellers will take their attached cameras or their Ring doorbell. And so this is the area where you really want to specify, nope, those things need to stay. Or if you're okay with the seller taking their attached TVs, well, then don't check this box. Another big one, purchase price. This is where you're going to enter in dollars how much you're willing, how much you're offering for the property. The next one is earnest money. This is like also called consideration or good faith deposit. And so really depends on the market. This can be any number that you want it to be. Most places, 1% of the purchase price is average. So if you're buying a $500,000 house, a $5,000 earnest money deposit is seen as respectable, but you could offer $100, you could offer $50,000. It's completely up to you what you want to put in there. I would recommend generally sticking around 1%. The more that you enter here, the more serious you look to the home seller. If you just put $100 in earnest money, it means there's basically no penalty should you change your mind and walk away from the home, because this is the money. Whatever you put in there, that's the money that you could potentially lose out on if you walk away without legal costs. And the delivery date, usually going to be 2 or 3 days after mutual acceptance. Mutual acceptance is defined by when both you as the buyer and the seller have signed, and all parties, like both you and the seller, have received signed copies of the agreement. So if they sign it at 11 p.m. on, let's just say, the 28th, but you don't receive the mutually signed copy until 9 a.m. on the 29th, well, the mutual date is now the 29th. That gets important when we start to talk about calculation of time. And then where does that earnest money go? I always recommend that it be held by the closing agent, that is the title company. And we're going to get to the title company in just a minute, but sometimes if you're self-represented, you won't have a buyer brokerage firm, so that won't apply. Could be held potentially by the listing agent's firm. I don't like that though. Just do closing agent. And then default. So this is if you were to just back out, you weren't able to make good on your contractual obligations. What happens to the earnest money? Just make it clean and just say that it's forfeiture of earnest money. That means that if without legal cause you're out, the seller gets to keep your $5,000. Your insurance company, title insurance company information is going to go here. Title insurance is so heavily regulated. Usually the seller will have already chosen a title company and have opened up pre-escrow. Unless you have a real strong preference or some sort of like family, friends, connection, discount, I would say keep it easy. Just go with whatever company the seller has chosen, Chicago Title, First American, whatever it is, but that'll get entered here. And the closing agent, usually this company name is going to be the same as the title insurance company, and then there will be like an individual escrow officer, and you'll put their name in here. Closing date. This is when escrow actually gets closed and when the property gets recorded. That's when the ownership gets transferred from the current owner to you. And generally about 40 days, 40 to 45 days from contract to closing, but it can be a lot quicker. Cash transactions can be as quick as generally like 4 or 5 days, maybe a week. You could move that quickly. With a lender involved, I would say probably 30 days minimum. Talk to your lender for sure. They might be able to get it done sooner, but most lenders have trouble getting appraisals back and completing underwriting in less than 30 days. And then possession date. So you can have your closing date of, let's just say, May 28th. Now, when do you actually get keys to the house? On closing, or is there another date? Maybe you're giving the seller some time to move out, or you're doing a rent back period. And so if that's the case, then you'd specify the date that you actually get possession. You get the keys to the house on this date here. Services of closing agent for payment of utilities. This is where you can ask the closing agent to help with all of the payoffs to make sure that there's no liens that get placed against the house by like an electric company or a water company for an unpaid bill. That's something that the closing agent can help with if you request it. There's another form that's required if you do. Otherwise, you can say that you waive that service from the closing agent and you take on the responsibility between you and the seller to just make sure that all of their old bills get paid off and you get your new services set up. This is an important one here too, line 13, charges/assessments levied before but due after closing. So sometimes there will be like improvements to the street that the house is on, and there could be an assessment where $1,000 is due. And so if you say prepaid in full by seller at closing, that means that any assessment that gets sent out, even if the due date for that assessment isn't for months and months later, if that assessment gets sent out before the closing date, the seller is responsible for it. I always say as a buyer, you want to check that because it guards you against an unexpected, very large bill. But maybe you're getting a smoking deal on the house, and so you're willing to assume the risk that there could be some sort of charges or assessments. And if that happens, you're willing to pay them. Seller citizenship, ask the listing agent about this. In most cases, a seller will not be a foreign person for the purposes of U.S. income taxation. That's all regulated by FIRPTA, which will be another document that the seller is responsible for filling out. And then information verification period. Generally, this, I would say 3 days. Your information verification is different from your inspection period. What this is being able to take all of the information that was given to you publicly by the listing agent through the listing, things like utility information or square footage of the house, the kinds of thing like, this is kind of a dumb one, but I've seen it where on the listing, it'll say that the kitchen has a microwave, but the kitchen doesn't have a microwave. Well, you have 3 days to verify everything that the listing agent has published in the online listing is true. And this would be one of those outs for your earnest money, so that if you were to come back and say, hey, during my information verification period, I found that the square footage was off by 700 square feet, you could walk away from the deal on this basis and get your earnest money back. Otherwise, if you feel like you've already verified everything that was in the listing, walked it all through, then you could just say that that information verification is satisfied. But for most people, I'd just give yourself a buffer of 3 days or so after mutual acceptance. And then you have your agency disclosure. Buyer will be unrepresented. You do not want dual agency. You're self-represented, you're DIY home buyer, so you're not going to have the buyer broker unrepresented here, and then the seller will be represented by the listing broker. Now, this is an interesting line in the Northwest MLS forms, buyer broker compensation. So the seller may be offering 3%. And because you don't have a buyer agent, you can say 3% is to be paid by the seller, and then click this box for an addendum for buyer credit, which is going to say that, hey, because I don't have an agent, that 3% that was offered by the seller to go to a buyer's agent, it's actually going to be coming to me in the form of a closing cost credit or purchase price reduction or whatever it is that you choose to use it for. And then addenda. This is where we list the addendums for addendums are just additional documents that are being added to the purchase and sale agreement. This is where we're going to add things like our financing contingency, inspection contingency, title contingency. And then, of course, if you had a buyer credit, you'd have that addendum in there, as well as if it's a unique property where you've got like septic or well or a survey contingency, you would note those things in here. Seller disclosure might be an addendum. It's on here. The listing agent can actually, they can't give you advice on what contingencies to include, but they can tell you, yeah, like the seller disclosure, that's one of the addenda that'll be part of this contract. So you need to dictate to them what contingencies you want, but they'll also help you make sure that all of that gets recorded in the addenda. This just says, helps prevent any pages go missing from the original purchase and sale agreement they're signing. Now, more addenda can always be added later, but this just helps kind of summarize, okay, here's what goes into this initial packet. And then, oh, look at that. You get all of my information here. This is where you would sign as the buyer. You wouldn't have any of my information in here. And then the seller side is going to remain unsigned, but until that they've had a chance to review it. And if they accept your offer, then they will sign it all here. And then the listing agent would have all of their information here. Now, there's a lot of just boilerplate legalese that goes into this contract. So the purchase price, the main thing I'll highlight here is that purchase price that we talk about is inclusive of the earnest money. So the earnest money is not in addition to the purchase price. If you as the home buyer go through with the contract, that earnest money comes back to you to be used toward your down payment or however else you plan to use it. Let's just say that this was a $500,000 home and earnest money was $5,000. Well, the only amount, if you were paying all cash for everything, you'd need to bring $495,000 for the remaining part of the purchase price. Earnest money gets specified here in terms of how earnest money gets handled. Generally, if the earnest money amount is more than $10,000, it has to get deposited into an interest-bearing trust account and there can be W-9 forms and whatnot. I generally say even if it's $1 million home, just do $9,000 in earnest money because who wants to be playing around with these interest-bearing accounts? But there may be good reason that you want to do $100,000 in earnest money, and that's fine too. This also outlines what happens upon the termination of the agreement and the release of earnest money. So do be sure to read through what's in here and the different timelines for disbursement of that earnest money, what happens if there's any sort of disputes. Included items. This specifies that, yeah, okay, we've got a couple of things here that we would need to select, but otherwise what's assumed to be included are things like your built-in appliances or wall-to-wall carpeting, curtains, as I mentioned, drapes, all other window treatments, window and door screens, awnings, storm doors. If you've got any questions about what is just included in the home, this is going to list it all out here. Condition of title. So the property shall be marketable at closing, which means that the seller has the right to sell it and that there are no liens or encumbrances, clouds, anything that would cause the seller, prevent them from being able to legally sell the property. And that title, there should be nothing that affects the value or unduly interferes with the buyer's reasonable use of the property. So that all gets specified here. Let's see here. I think there's another spot, title insurance. It's this next one. This is where, at least in Washington, it says that a seller is the one who is paying for the ALTA form of homeowner policy of title insurance. So this is like the form of title insurance that you need to cover yourself as a home buyer. Now, if you have a lender, your lender is going to require an additional copy of title insurance that covers them. And that's usually about $1,000. So that's something that you'll want to budget for, and it'll be part of your closing statement and lender fees. But just know that you personally will be covered by what's specified here in this title insurance section at the seller's expense. Closing and closing, you'll want to just pay attention to calendar as you choose your closing date, because closings need to happen on a Monday through Friday and not on a bank holiday. This specifies what happens if it does fall on a day when it's Saturday, Sunday, legal holiday, or when the county recording office is closed. So it also specifies here that possession happens at 9 p.m. on the possession date unless it is specified differently in this closing date. You could say possession on the 29th at 5 p.m. and that would override this default of 9 p.m. It also outlines what happens. The seller has to deliver keys and garage door remotes and access codes. It also says that the seller must maintain the property in the present condition, normal wear and tear expected, until the buyer is provided possession. If anything goes wrong in the house, let's just say the HVAC system, the air conditioner were to die in that time, well, the seller would have to replace that system or appliance if it became inoperative or malfunctioned prior to closing. Buyer also reserves the right to walk through the property within 5 days of closing to verify that the seller has maintained the property and systems / appliances. So this is what we call a final walkthrough. I recommend doing this as close to closing as possible within no more than 24 hours to just walk through, make sure that everything is in the condition that where you had any repairs that you negotiated during the inspection period, making sure that all of those repairs were done. 1031 like-kind exchange. This won't apply to most people, but if you are doing a Section 1031 property exchange, check this out. The section here outlines how closing costs, prorations, charges, assessments, how those get divided up between the home seller and the home buyer. So this is important for understanding what kinds of things are going to be you will be responsible for as the home buyer and closing costs. You'll also get a nice summary of this from both the lender and the title company, and they'll make sure that those things balance. But if you're just looking to kind of get ahead of it, go through this section carefully. Sale information. This is just simply a notice that says everything that's in this agreement, price, terms, has to get reported to the multiple listing service, published to its members, financial institutions, appraisers, so that these kinds of things more or less become public record. Seller citizenship, FIRPTA, that's more for the seller to worry about than for you. However, if the seller were to try and dodge this FIRPTA deal, you terminate the agreement and you would get your earnest money back. Notices and delivery of documents. So this is what I was kind of talking about, where the timelines go by not exactly when the document was signed, but by when it was actually received. Buyer, seller, listing agent, they need to be prompt in their notifications and receipts of notices. This is one of the reasons why it's so helpful not to have a buyer's agent, because it's one less person in the game of telephone. So the listing agent will just shoot you directly any notices or documents that you need, and you don't have to worry about a buyer agent not getting it to you. This also specifies that email transmission constitutes delivery of documents. Computation of time is really important. Any period of time measured in days and stated in the agreement shall start on the day following the event commencing the period and shall expire at 9 p.m. the last calendar day of the specified period of time. Any day, this is big, any specified period of 5 days or less, except for any time period relating to the possession date, shall not include Saturdays, Sundays, or legal holidays. So if we're 5 days or less, it's business days. So if you sign, let's say your earnest money is due within 3 days and you go to Mutual on Thursday. Well, Thursday is day 0, Friday is day 1, Saturday and Sunday don't count. So then you have Monday, day 2, Tuesday, day 3. Your earnest money would be due to the title company by the end of Tuesday, that is day 3. However, if it is more than 5 days, then we count calendar days. And so if your earnest money was due in 7 days, well, you would count the Saturday and the Sunday and any legal holidays. And this is where people really get tripped up. And this is where you can get kind of screwed up in your contingencies if you don't compute time correctly. This is one of the main things that I help keep homebuyers organized in with DIY Homebuyer Academy and those that I work with, but really make sure that you understand the computation of time. This just says that electronic signatures are legit, they count. Assignment is rare, but this would just be that, let's just say the buyer gets you get the home under contract, and then you have somebody else comes along and says, hey, I actually want that home and I'll pay you $20,000 if I can take over the contract. Well, the seller gets a say in whether or not they're going to allow you to assign the contract. Default, if the buyer fails without legal excuse to complete the purchase of the property, then this is where we say that forfeiture of earnest money. Your $5,000 goes directly to the seller. You don't pass go. You don't get your money back. Professional advice and attorney's fees is just a notice that you should seek counsel of an attorney and certified public accountant to review the terms of the agreement. You would pay your own legal fees for such a review. However, if there's any sort of a suit, then the party holding the earnest money commences as the interpleader action, and the prevailing party is entitled to reasonable attorney fees, expenses being covered. Offer just says that the expiration date, it's got to be 9 p.m. or before, unless stated differently in the first page of this agreement. But acceptance shall not be effective until a signed copy is received by the other parties. That received is a key word. The counter offer. We'll talk about this in another video just to prevent this from getting too grossly long. But if the seller were to present a counter offer, it just says that that counter offer basically constitutes a whole new agreement, and this just outlines the timelines for acceptance there. Similar offer and counter offer. Expiration date, if there's nothing specified, two days is the default. Got the agency disclosure. I think I already covered that. Brokerage firm compensation, not for you to worry about because you, wise person, are benefiting from not having a buyer agent. If the house is built prior to 1978, there must be a disclosure of information on lead-based paint and lead-based paint hazards. So that's something that the listing agent will get to you. You have up to 3 days to rescind the agreement based upon any lead concerns. This is just saying what I said about the information verification period and how if you give timely notice, the agreement terminates and you get your earnest money back. Property condition disclaimer that the seller must be truthful about their knowledge of the property to the very best of their ability. And if they misrepresent it, or if the listing agent misrepresents it, they can be liable. But it also says that you as the buyer should do your own due diligence when it comes to, there might be defects that the seller and the listing agent have no idea about. And so you should do your due diligence, identify the presence of defective or hazardous materials, look into whether the property is suitable for your intended use, ensure water supply is sufficient, look into your ability to get flood, fire, earthquake, landslide insurance. Those are all going to be big questions, especially depending on where you live. There may be HOA or local ordinances that restrict short-term rentals. So it's really just saying, hey, as the home buyer, you're the one that needs to do the due diligence. And then, of course, fair housing. There will be no discrimination. That is the bulk of a purchase and sale agreement. I'm going to do a few follow-up videos that go over the contingencies that I recommend in every purchase and sale agreement. But for the sake of time and not wanting this video to get away from us and get too long, I'm going to stop it here with just a big overall, here's what to expect in a purchase and sale agreement. Like I said, this one is specific to Washington State with the Northwest Multiple Listing Service. The exact contract for your area may look slightly different, but at least this creates some good categories for you. Of course, if you want to review your purchase and sale agreement and just have somebody to talk through it with, one, you can talk with a real estate attorney in your area, or you can reach out to me and I would be more than happy to discuss the different options that we've got for going through things together as well. Hope this helps. See you in the next one.